Oh, it gave you the option to leave the meeting then. I'm pleased nobody actually did. But so thank you everybody for jumping online this evening. I really appreciate it. It's really nice to see lots of people that I recognise. Actually, lots of my tutors are there, and for some of you that I've not met before, I absolutely do appreciate you coming online. So this evening we're just going to spend a bit of time looking at speech and language development. I'm not a speech and language therapist by any means, but the majority of my teaching has been in SLD, PMLD. So this kind of stuff I can talk about all day long. So I'm going to have a lovely time, obviously, talking about it. And by all means, just call out if you have any questions. It's going to be really informal. I've tried to include lots of examples that you might want to use with some of your young people and really talk about processes that we used to use in the SLD school that I worked at. So hopefully it should be really informative for you guys. And we'll get going if that's all right. Okay, so these are the aims of the session. I think I've been a bit bold by saying to define communication. I've just realised what I've written. But yeah, we're going to have a little look at definition of communication. We're going to spend a bit of time looking at receptive and expressive communication. I don't know about you guys, but I always find receptive communication quite tricky to assess, especially with our young people with severe learning difficulties. So I'm going to try to include a little bit of information around that. We're also going to look at some different communication methods that I would have used in my teaching over the years. And then I want you to finish by looking at symbolic development, just because I've got a couple of questions and statements for us to discuss at the end. So I'll be keen for your point of view, if that's all right. People are nodding. Well, I can see 4 people nodding, so I feel like that's okay. Yeah. Okay, so what is communication? Oh, excuse me. This is the language pyramid we always refer to at school. It just kind of reinforces to us what the foundation of communication really is all about. I think it's quite interesting that expressive language and then speech doesn't really come to the very, very top. Often when we're working with our young people, there'll be lots of skill sets rather that we need to really plug that are around listening and attention and playing interaction. So although you may have a target around expressive communication, just make sure that you go back to some of the skill sets that we've in the bottom of that pyramid, because if we don't plug those first, then it's really, really tricky for our young people to move up, so to speak. So I've just left that in there for us to refer back to as and when. Okay, so this is what's called the communication change. I'm not about to read it all out now, because you guys hopefully would have the copy of the presentation. The main thing that I want us to kind of get our heads around is the fact that it really is a chain. Every single part of this is viewed as a separate link. So a young person could be having a really tricky time with either receptive or expressive language for any one of these links could be missing. Often what's perceived as the difficulty that a young person may be having with communication in terms of how they present is not actually the missing link. So I think it's always good to have a diagram like this to go back to. I've got an example of it right now. Okay, so this young person was having difficulties with following verbal instructions, but actually that was due to a weakness within their auditory memory skills. Auditory memory, I think, is crucial for our young people. Often when I was teaching, I'd be getting ever so excited because I'd have a young person sat right in front of me and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they can follow 2 keyword instructions. This is going brilliantly. Then I'd give them an instruction that meant they had to get up, retain that information, move across a busy classroom and come back to me, and I would see them get up, they'd smiling, yeah, we've got this, Nikki, and they'd get part way and they could not retain that information. Now, often I didn't actually realise how much I was giving away when I was teaching. It was only when we started to record the young person and us as adults that I realised I was giving all sorts of cues away. I was like emphasising words, I was giving a bit of a nod, I might even be pointing at something without realising. So all that kind of gestural stuff was coming in, which meant that the young people that I was working with often, they weren't really taken on board the verbal communication. They were more about reading the rest of the cues. So the minute they got up and moved and had to retain that, all those other cues that I was giving to them rather, had gone. So yeah, Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to give another little example about that, actually. I often would be working with parents, and I had one mum say to me, Nikki, they don't need to worry about retaining information, because my son, when I say to them, it's bedtime, go get your pajamas, they'll go up, get their pajamas, bring them down, and we get ready for bed. And it was only when we broke it down that I explained they watched the same thing on the TV, then the curtains were drawn, then there'd be the mum would be pointing to the stairs. She might also have the blanket which they always would take to bed. So the mum was really excited the fact that her young person could actually understand the verbal instruction, go upstairs, get your pajamas, but actually there's nothing to say that we're really taking on all that verbal stuff. What they were really very, very good at was reading the environment. Does that make sense? Yeah. And actually the routine gave it away, because she could say any old words and still point to the stairs, and they'd probably go upstairs and get their pajamas because all the other steps had happened in front of them. Okay. Right, so this is the difference between hearing versus listening, and I didn't want to be rude by putting this in. I just think it's quite good for us to remember. I know you guys would already know this. I think it's interesting that actually, in order to take part in the active process, which requires concentration, which is listening, often many of our young people will be having huge sensory processing difficulties. So in order for them to be able to listen, it's really hard for us to teach them to filter out lots of other things that they don't need to be hearing at that moment. I used to have a young person in my class who was fabulous at hearing. So one of us would be working with him, and he would be repeating every bit of another conversation that was happening within the classroom, or somebody will walk past the door, you hear him say, well done, good walking, and I'd look and there'd be a member of staff with a young person walking down the corridors. I was sat right in front of him, and he could not filter everything else away in order to attend to what I was saying. He could hear, but he wasn't actively listening. So we had to work really hard to reassess the learning environment, make lots of changes, and really put in a huge amount of sensory work into him prior to teaching. I won't talk too much this evening about sensory, because I did a whole other training on that, so you get a report to as well. But I think it's really important that communication and sensory processing are seen as part of the same journey that we take our young people on. We can't get them ready to communicate if we've not met their sensory needs first. I really do believe that. So that's why I've added that in. Everybody all right so far? Yeah. Okay. So these are all the parts of receptive communication that we may teach our young people as they are building those building blocks. There's a huge amount on here. I think it's good to have as a reference point, because often we have to remind ourselves, okay, what exactly do I need to assess? For some young people, they are working at that understanding of really understanding what object permanence is. Now, initially, we may not have realised that was even part of receptive communication. So I've tried to include in here as many different examples of skill sets related to receptive communication as possible. Hopefully, some of this stuff you'll just use as a reference point when you're working with your young people. So auditory memory skills is in there. Purposeful interaction, noticing stimuli. It really does start at that quite low level, moving on to concepts like understanding about reasoning, questioning. But yeah, I've tried to cover as much as possible in that for you guys to refer back to. What I would say is I can add onto the tutor portal. I think Rachel's going to nod at this point. I've got lots of assessments that you guys can use for any one of these levels, that if I put them, I'll say I'm not going to do, I'm not very technical. Rachel probably will. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. If she pops them onto the tutor portal, then you have that as a reference point alongside with this. Would that be useful? Yeah, what I'll do is as well, I'll link them according to the level of understanding of the young person, because there's lots of different receptive communication assessments that I would have used. But if I link them together, I think that'll make a bit more sense for you guys. Okay. And then expressive communication. I quite like this as a little picture because it makes sense to me. These are basically all of the vital ingredients that we need in order to be able to communicate expressively. So we've looked at receptive, and then we've looked at, and now we've got expressive. The receptive part, like I said before, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on, because I think that's the part that I always find quite tricky to assess, hence why I'm going to put all those assessments onto the portal for you. Okay, do we have any questions before we move on to the second part? Oh. No? Okay, cool. Okay, this is where I quite like to talk about the nitty-gritty part of teaching. So for me, communication methods, it's obviously we need to know the input around the receptive and expressive communication, but this is the section where we're going to go, okay, what do we use in order to support our young people with severe learning difficulties for them, in order for them to communicate? I would say at this point as well, we've had quite a lot of discussions within our company. We are actively changing some of the language that we use. And as a company, we use pre-verbal to talk about our young people as opposed to non-verbal. So that's just a sideline. It's something that we used to use within my previous school. Often for parents, when you are talking about their young person, to use the terminology non-verbal can be quite negative without meaning to be. And parents will often view that as okay, so that's where we're at, and we haven't got anywhere to go with it. You know, non-verbal is almost like putting the, like a full stop, non-verbal, and we're done. Whereas pre-verbal, I think, hopefully gives more the impression of there's lots of skills that we are building on. And there's still an opportunity potentially for a young person to gain verbal language. So I've just realised how dark it is, Rachel. Please, may I just quickly put my light on? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Is that better? I do apologise. I do apologise. Okay. Right. So these are all the different ways that our young people and us may communicate. It's not, as we know, it's not a case of, okay, that young person communicates with photographs and then that's it. Lots of our young people will dip into many of these, as will we. I think it's really important to give yourself an opportunity to just kind of sit back and watch a young person. As teachers, we like to do that anyway, don't we? We quite like to observe our young people and see how they respond to the environment. So that's all the different ways that we communicate. Oh, is someone going to say something? No, there was a bit of a sound, don't worry. And then this is the reasons as to why. I think what's interesting about this page is often, that's actually not me. often some of our young people, if they're having a bit of a tricky moment, may use different ways to communicate with us, but actually it could be because they are expressing their feelings, it could be to seek attention, it could be to initiate an interaction. I'm a very firm believer, as I'm sure many of you, if not all of you are, the fact that any type of behaviour we can attribute to communication. And actually, so I quite like having this in front of me an awful lot, because if a young person is having a tricky time, I need to try to figure out the why and then give them an alternative, because what they're trying to communicate is not going to go away. And it's our job to then give them an alternative. It's not our job to mute their voice. It's our job to understand why they are trying to communicate what they are. It's also our job to then, like I say, give the alternative and actually teach that. So I always view it as a really good teaching point. If a young person's having a tricky time, I think that just gives us something else to look at and view and pick apart, and then, yeah, give them an alternative next time. So with that in mind, these are some of the communication processes that we're going to go through. So most of you would have heard of PECS, I'm assuming. Lots of nods. Hooray. I say lots of nods. I can only see 4 of you, but I'm assuming everybody else is nodding. Okay. We're going to go through each one of these. Okay. Some of you will have experiences with different things. Some
Nikki,
young people.
Nikki, there is a no. Somebody saying no to PECS. So can you just explain? That's
all right, because the next couple of slides are on PECS. Don't be worried. It's coming up. All right. At my previous school, these were the kind of like go-to communication process that the majority of our young people would use. The communication book basically includes symbolized text that's just in something that's a little bit more formal. Prologue, quote to go. Has anybody heard of that before? No. This is good because I've got lots of information on that, so that's brilliant. Thank you, that's the right answer. Because otherwise I think, oh my gosh, what am I going to teach you guys? So prologue, quote to go is almost like the next step up from PECS. Macaton, most of you guys would have heard of Macaton. Okay, I'm going to spend a bit of time debating Macaton at the end. And also eye gaze. We had quite a few young people at my school that would use eye gaze. For them, because they had quite limited movement, so for those guys it really was all about here. They used to be able to they'd have a grid and they'd be making requests or commenting by accessing that. I'm not really going to go into eye gaze too much because I don't really think it's appropriate for many of our young people that we have, but obviously if the profile of the young people that that you guys work with change, then I can then update this without a doubt. Okay, so these, very quickly, these are the different PECS phases. Now, PECS stands for Picture Exchange Communication System. If you talk to a speech and language therapist, they're quite purist when it comes to PECS, and PECS will include a young person using symbolized text. And what I mean by that is where you've got like the black and white picture and then the written word underneath. Okay. And they will begin by teaching them to exchange. They will use a blank card to say, if you hand me this, you'll then get something in return. Now, for the young people that I've worked with, symbolized text was not accessible for them, but they absolutely did need to learn to exchange and to have a communication partner and to have to learn to direct that communication. So I'm going to go through some ideas of the resources that I used with young people in my class. Yes, it is phase 1 PECS, but it's absolutely not symbols, because I would rather have my young people have a large vocabulary of, I don't know, 10, 15 objects or photographs than actually I'd be having a really limited vocabulary of symbols, because actually that's not how they were viewing the world. They didn't really understand the symbolized text. Okay, so the only reason I'm adding that in there is because I'm not saying this is how you start PECS, but this is how I started it in my class at my old previous school. All right, is everyone okay with that? Yeah. Okay, so this is how I would get started. So I'm going to put another document on the tutor portal that's called Handy Hints. Okay. So Handy Hints is my go-to document whenever I'm starting to set up phase 1 PECS with my young people with severe learning difficulties. Now, often a young person may not already have some motivators that they want to ask for time and time again. A lot of my young people, they weren't really into toys. I mean, they wouldn't mind a car, but it's pretty much because they wanted to spin it and look at it from a different angle, you know. They didn't mind blocks because they wanted to line them up and then just look at them from slightly different angles. In terms of toys, so to speak, there wasn't a huge amount that my young people were particularly motivated by. They were motivated if I did something quite, you know, extreme with them and out there, but then I realised it was just me that was the exciting thing, not necessarily the objects. So we started using this document that's called Handy Hints. And what it does is supports you to find reinforcers for your young person you're working with. And you begin by observing the young person and looking at how they actually self-stimulate. So I've put an example in here of a young person that uses vestibular movement. So this is my young person that would be bouncing and spinning and like real thrill seeker, climbing and jumping and doing a bit of everything, okay? So the document though will help you to identify whether the young person uses visual, auditory, tactile, vestibular, smell or proprioception, okay? But for this case, we're just going to look at vestibular. So you've observed your young person, you've looked to see the types of self-stimulation they use, and then it gives you a really lovely list of resources that will give the same feedback as those behaviours that they were doing previously. So rather than be on their head upside down or banging their head, actually we would reinforce that with, we might use like vibration toy, we might get them rolling on a barrel, we might get them spinning on a chair, whatever it may be. Okay, does that make sense so far? Yeah, useful document if I share it with you guys. Yeah, okay. Thanks for the thumbs up, Harriet. Mostly appreciate that. Okay, so I know that my young person is self-motivated vestibular, okay? This is my young guy, this is true story. This is my young guy, 2.5, started with me full-time because why would we wait? We might as well just go for it. Pre-verbal, would often pull an adult in order to initiate physical contact. So that might look like they might pull at your hair, they might bite you, they might grab you. The why part of it absolutely was to initiate interaction. So what I needed to do was replace that with something else that they could use to ask for that kind of interaction. So rather than them coming and pulling my hair, I needed to give them a slightly different object. This young person also had visual impairment. So I wanted to replace the hair pulling as well, and the need for that physical. I wanted to include some push and pull resistant games, and also this young person really loved to be patted. So what I introduced was the neon magic glove, because of course you would, why would you not? Okay, so the neon magic glove, I taught him over time that when I put this glove on, well, I'd have two. When I put these gloves on, that was our time to be doing that real physical interaction. Over time, he learned very quickly, and I'll show you in a minute how we did that. He learned very quickly. The glove was in like a plastic container, you know, like we have your Chinese in, it was in one of them, okay? And he learned very quickly that if I handed this to me or one of my staff, we would do all of those push and pull games, we would do lots of patting, and he was having a lovely time. He was getting his sensory needs met and he was requesting. What I would say though is that the thing that he likes more than anything, all of these physical games, as with a lot of the young people that are working at phase 1 PECS, none of these activities have a natural ending. Yeah, like it's not a game that has a start, a middle and an end. Like physical games will just go on and on and on. So for me to just stop it suddenly was not a fabulous idea, because he was having a lovely time. He was having the best time of his life. He was requesting, and then for me to then stop that was really, really tricky. I also I was not able to, because it's absolutely wrong. I'm not going to then put that glove away because that's his voice. You can't take something out of a PECS book just because you don't want the person to ask for it, okay? So what I used to do for this young man is I would have a piece of card that had 5 Velcro cotton reels on it with a pot at the end. In effect, it was pretty much like using like a timer, okay? But I wanted to have something that meant that I could control how quickly and slowly it went. So if we were working like this and it was getting close to dinner, basically every time he requested it, he'd get his feedback that he wanted, and then I would then remove one of those cotton reels and pop it in the pot, okay? It's not that every time he requested, one would be taken away. Sometimes he might request it 3 or 4 times and then I'd take one away. Other times, if it was like, oh my gosh, we need to be getting out to play, I'd whip him off quite quickly, yeah? But for him, he needed to see visually that something was coming to an end, and he knew that he was ready for that, and it was, does that make sense? Okay, so I used to use the two alongside each other. So this is how we use phase 1 PECS. We need to make sure we have a communicative partner and a silent prompter. Now, if you're going to communicate with me, I can't prompt you and receive your information at the same time because it's too confusing. So, I don't know, so if you're going to hand me one of those bags or a Chinese box that's got something in it, I can't put my hand out to receive it because then I'm prompting you. But the silent prompter can do that. So that's the person that sits behind the young person. The silent prompter says what's on the tin, really, doesn't say a thing, doesn't make eye contact, not going to go leaning around to look at the young person. None of that happens, because over time, you will phase that silent prompter out, and therefore the young person could just request from their own, okay? So they can't become reliant on it. Often the silent prompter will start off by moving the hand to the box or the bag and handing it over. Over time, they might start, the hand will go down the arm, or they might just like tap the young person's elbow just to use a physical prompt. So you've got the communicative partner, the person who sits in front of the young person, and then the silent prompter, is the one that sits behind. Make sense so far?
Yes.
Okay. Then I've added in the bit about joint attention. Joint attention is really, really important for our young people. So joint attention is when, if you hand something to me, I'll receive it. I'm then going to hold it right up here next to my eye, because I want that young person to look at me, look at the object, and then look back at me to make sure I'm receiving the information. That's joint attention. It's not making eye contact, because you're not asking them to look directly at you. You're asking them to look at the object, then look back at you. It's a bit like, you know when a baby in a high chair lobs their bottle, I shouldn't say lob, sorry, it's Essex in me, throws their bottle over the side of their high chair and then looks at you and then looks down to say, you're going to get that or what? Yeah, that's joint attention. They don't just look at you and wait. They give you a clue by going, have you seen that I've thrown that bottle? Any chance you can pick it up? Okay, that's joint attention. All right, does that make sense? The only thing I would say about phase 1 is that when we get to the stage where we like to introduce a photograph, it will go on front of the pot or the bag, whatever you're using. There's always the word underneath the photograph, because we want to make sure that all the adults that are working with that young person use the same words. So my neon glove, excuse me, that said on there tickle, because that's what the young person wanted, tickle. Another young person would want row, so then we would have row the boat, whatever it may be, but it needs to have the same words so that every adult uses the same language. All right, and then over time they may actually then take the photograph off and hand it to them, because the other point of having the photograph on there is we're trying to teach the young person that photograph means that object. So we're teaching them like the cognitive skill of being able to read the environment as well. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so phase 2 is distance and persistence. Don't worry, I'm not going through all 8 phases. I'm only doing the first few, okay? So phase 2, distance persistence. this is when the young person has got to travel to make their request. So you'd see that super friendly lady sitting on the chair with her back to the young person. That's intentional, okay? She really is a lovely lady because she's intentionally going to put her back. She might offer her hand, and then the young person has really got to persist to get that adult to acknowledge them and to say, I'm giving you this piece of information. I am directing my communication at you. The lady standing is the silent prompter. So even at this stage, sometimes we may need a silent prompter. Initially, the silent prompter will be very hands-on and support the young person. If the young person turns around to look at the silent prompter, are they going to say, that's well done, we're walking over here? No, they're not even going to make eye contact. If that young person turned around to look at them, the silent prompter would look the other way because they don't want to receive any communication. The only person that wants to receive the communication is the lady sat on the chair. When we are teaching distance persistence, young people could be exchanging with an object like we've talked about before, or photographs or symbols. That just means that you can be working at a different cognitive level, but actually your communication level of understanding with communication is still the same. Yeah. So a young person could understand hundreds and hundreds of symbols, but yet they are still working at the same level of communication as a young person that understands the world in objects. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Whoever's saying yes, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
So,
Nikki, can I just ask a question on
well,
just on the silent prompter, because we're in a very different situation as tutors.
you've got parents and carers.
I was going to say, would you suggest parents and carers?
Absolutely, and then swap the role. So this is your opportunity to model it for the parent and carer. So to be the communicative partner, you've probably got a bit more work to do. You know, you've got to do the joint attention, you need to name the object, you need to give it back, you might need to do your cotton reels or whatever it's going to be to put in a pot. That's you modeling it. The parent can be the silent prompter as long as you make it clear to them that they're not to communicate with their young person at that point. Yeah, the parent will be the silent prompter, and then swap it round. Because then I think it's a really good opportunity, Rachel, for you to empower the parent that you're working with. Yeah, so sometimes the parent initially I would have the parent to be the silent prompter, and then I would then swap it when they feel a bit more confident, because they obviously, when you go home, they will then have to become the communicative partner.
Yep.
Okay. Right. Phase 3. This is when a young person is learning to discriminate. So they're scanning, choosing what they fancy, and then handing it over to you. So that you can see there that very different in the way that it is set up, but the skill for communication remains exactly the same. So that's a PECS book on the right hand side, but actually we're just using it as like a board really. So although this is PECS, it's only now that you might start to use something that even resembles a PECS book. Once a young person has quite a few motivators, then we will often decide to put them at this level, put them on different base boards according to the categories. So you might have a base board that's all food they like. You might have a base board that's motivators that links to play and interaction with an adult. Because over time, you want them to be able to sift through different categories. So that's why this is set up as it is. So the one on the right, obviously, well, not obviously, but that's snack time. For some young people, they still require the symbol to be coloured. Other young people are happy with it to be black and white. It just depends on their level of understanding. Right. So this is then when we start to introduce a sentence starter. I just want to say at this point, it's not that every young person is going to fly through these phases, and it doesn't matter if they don't. What matters is that they have a voice, that they have a varied vocabulary, and they know how to direct their communication. So if a young person is working at phase 2, distance and persistence, and that's where they plateau, but actually they've recognised that they can understand a big varied vocabulary. They can use distance and persistence when they're out in the community, when they're in their home. If they can do that, that's fantastic. So it's really about, it's not trying to push them through the phases, it's just more about when they're having their trickiest times, do they still have that voice and can they access it? Yeah, so I didn't want you guys to think that it's all about moving through the phases, but for some young people they will move through these phases. Okay, so this is the sentence starter. Most of you, when you think of PECS, is this what you thought of? You have a PECS book, you have an I want, and you create your sentence. Yeah, okay, so often we start with I want. The picture on the left is this young person is working at a level where the resources aren't actually in their PECS book. It's all laid out on the front. The I want is always on the left because we're trying to teach them sentence structure at this point. So they'll take that I want symbol, pop it on the sentence strip at the bottom, then they'll discriminate between those three photographs, decide what they want, put it on the sentence strip, then they pull that sentence strip off, and then they hand it to the adult. Okay. The photograph on the right is the young person who's now at the stage where they could actually go through their PECS books to find the correct page. So, you know, I said that over time we like to teach our young people about categories. That's why every page is set up slightly differently. This young person still requires that I want symbol to be placed at the very beginning of the sentence structure, and for them to have a page that's sentence starters and then have a page that's different categories is a bit too much for them. So that's why that's set up like that. But both are phase 4 sentence starters. Initially, when you're teaching a sentence starter, you'll go back to having the silent prompter again, because you're teaching something different. So the silent prompter would then be involved. Okay. Right. Okay. This is I need. I need is an interesting one because, so this young person's got a PECS book with lots of their motivators in, with I want. I need is on a separate board for them because they don't really want pasta in life. It's not the best thing in the world, but they do need it in order to complete this activity that the teacher has set up. Okay, so that's why I need it. So yet again, I need's on the first strip on the left to teach the young person. I take that first. Then they will then have some instructions that they're following that are probably communicate and print as well, symbolise. They'll look at the instruction and go, what is it I actually need next? Okay, because number 2 might say cup. So they'll come back to their base board and they'll say, right, I need cup, hand it to the adult give them a cup, and then they can look to see what their next instruction is. So at this point, when we're teaching I need, it is more to do with an activity that they are completing. So that's when we can then include more instructions and the expressive part as well. Okay. I think it's the last one that I've put on it. Oh, this is 5. Look, I've just put PECS phase. It's supposed to be a 5 there. I do apologise. Okay, so this is attributes. So I'm understanding I want, I'm understanding I need. There's actually lots of adults in the room I can communicate with. So now I'm going to start to include the adult that I would like to communicate with, my preferred. Okay, this is because we're also trying to teach that you can't ask everybody at the same time, or you can't interrupt constantly. So if Sarah won't mind me saying this, she's one of my old teachers I used to work with, she'll be thrilled that she's on here. But so if I was teaching and I was busy and the young person wanted to come and ask me, I may not respond. So then they're going to go back to their PECS book and go, well, hang on, there's Sarah sitting over there, I'll try her next. So that's what we're teaching them. Initially, though, we just have the one photograph of each adult, and the silent prompter will teach them that Sarah is that Sarah sitting on the chair over there. What I would say is that every piece of visual information that is either put into a PECS book or on a baseboard has to be taught. You can't just go, oh, they're working on symbols, so I'm going to load their PECS book up with symbols, and because it's in there, they're going to know that vocabulary, because that's not the case. You still got to teach it first and then add it into their PECS book or their baseboard, whatever it may look like. So yeah, this one says, Sarah, I want bricks. Right. Okay, have we got any questions about PECS before I move on to Pro-Loquo to go? Because I know I've talked an awful lot. No, and I haven't got a clue whether you're putting hands up or anything like that because I can't see a thing. So I'm assuming that's not happening, but that's good. We'll carry on. Right, so Pro-Loquo to go. Has anybody heard of Pro-Loquo to go? Lots of the young people that I worked with within my school would have used Pro-Loquo to go. It's an app that they would have on an iPad. Some may have it on something smaller because then it's easier to pop in their pockets. It basically means that we can load lots more information because you can't have a PECS book over time that's like this thick and you've got to carry it around on cart. Do you know what I mean? We can't be doing that. So this means that we can really load up lots and lots of lots and lots of vocabulary. The vocabulary is sorted according to categories. So do you remember we looked at categories in a PECS book? Okay, then this is how it's set in here. It can be, well, it should be, and it is completely personalised to the young person. So my category of activities will be very different to your category of activities. Yeah, as teachers, we used to change the settings on this quite a lot and set stuff up for them. Like I said before, all of the language before it goes on here absolutely does need to be taught. And every homepage will look very different for each young person. In basically what happens is as you go into each category, you select one icon and then it comes up in the center, the sentence strip at the top. You know, it says I want, that in effect is like your PECS strip. Okay, so you'd go in, you click on I want, and this one says I want to go outside. So I think probably go outside would be in activities. You go in, you click on activities, you'd find the one that says go outside, and then it comes up on the top. For lots of young people, they will then need to press that because it will then say the sentence for them. Obviously, we can't forget the fact that they need to be able to communicate, direct that communication. I often have had parents who came to our school quite late when their young person was a bit older, and they say, Nikki, my son or daughter is now using Pro-Loquo to go. But they still get quite frustrated and have tricky days. Well, when you observe them, you realise they were fab at using the iPad. They were great at the technical side of things, and they could flick through here like it was a menu, almost like a buffet. Everything was on available to them. They create their sentence, but then they sit and press it and wait because they'd lost the ability to actually make sure that that person was listening to them. So we had to then go back and teach them to actually hand the iPad over or get up to the adult. So I think it's just important to remember that some young people, just because they're very good at the tech side, doesn't necessarily mean that Pro-Loquo to go is going to be great for them, because they really need to be secure in all of those other levels of PECS and be really secure in the communication skills that they've got before we even think about Pro-Loquo. But it doesn't mean it's not fabulous. It really is for lots of young people. Okay. So.
Nikki, I'm going to disturb you again.
Go on. Am I going back?
No, I'm going to the Pro-Loquo to go. You obviously had a school subscription to it. Do you know if there's any alternatives that our young people could use?
Grid players, all right. Pro-Loquo to go is the best version. Often parents would buy the iPad and we would then load it up for them. Let me speak to one of my friends who's a speech and language therapist and see if there's cheaper versions or alternatives. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Leave it with me. Yeah. Is that the question?
That was. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, cool. Right. So I'm going to show Pro-Loquo to go in use. This is a little American film clip. So yeah, it's not my school. This is This is actually one of the things they use to advertise it, really. Okay, everybody ready? I just want to fast forward it through to the right bit. Okay.
Good job. Friends, Max. What do you want to do? Do. Paint. Learn. Art activity. Colors. Purple. Tell me the whole thing. Max, paint purple. Okay, here you go, Max.
Right, so at the end it says Max paint purple, okay? Before we got to that, you could hear Max, could you guys hear it, by the way? Yeah, so before you got to him creating the sentence, you heard him tap on every category. At my previous school, we would have it so that you wouldn't hear that part for every category, because otherwise that's a lot of information for a young person to be hearing. So as they tapped on it, you wouldn't hear activities, paint, colour, you wouldn't hear that. You would just hear it once the sentence had been created, okay? I love it when it starts so where he says Max friend and then points, like we're friends. I thought that was ever so cute. Okay. If you get a chance though, I would look at some of the little video links on Pro Like Quote to Go, because yeah, they're really fun to watch. Actually, watch the young person do well. What I would say is that environment cracks me up, because it's just like one adult with one young lady, one young man in a great big room on their own. I know class isn't like that, so yeah, but that doesn't mean in the hustle and bustle that can't be done. Okay, right. We've talked about this a little while ago, but just remember that a young person might have the understanding to navigate the app, but just got to make sure that they really understand about communicative partner and everything. Yeah, and just going over it again, that Pro Like Quote to Go, we need to teach categorization, and we then need to teach the vocabulary before adding it. So not only do we need to teach them what that individual symbol actually means, but we need to teach the young person where you would find it. So lots of cognition lessons in terms of teach them to understand categorization and subcategorization is really important first. Okay, right. Any other questions before we move on to the last part? I've also got no clue what the time is or anything. I feel like I've like
Nikki,
okay.
Rachel came up with saying in the chat clicker was good.
All right, brilliant.
Rachel, did you want to fill in on that a little bit? Oh, Rachel.
Sorry, I just had to find the unmute button. Yeah, we use Clicker. This was a little while ago, but it was good because it has lots of different pictures in, to represent a variety of things. But you could also put your own in, and you could import your own pictures, photographs, or drawings, or whatever, and words as well. So it expanded the range quite a lot, and it also then can be used for students to create longer sentences, etc. But yeah, Clicker, I thought Clicker was, I don't know how much it is, and but I know that we were able to buy them individually, so there you go.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a good point, because I totally didn't mention the fact that you can do the same on Pro Like Quote to Go as well. It doesn't have to always be symbolized text. For a young person that needs photographs, they can be added, and also for some young people, if they're really motivated by a certain object or activity, they can quite quickly learn what that word means. So actually then you've got a combination of everything on there. But no, thank you, Rachel. You've really reminded me to say that. Brilliant. You can come again. Okay, so we'll have a quick look at symbolic meaning. obviously a lot of our young people understand the world at the most concrete level. I don't want to tell you guys things that you don't know already, so I've just popped that in there. The bit that I wanted to spend a bit of time looking at though is the next page, which is looking at the most concrete, most abstract. I think it's really interesting that Makaton comes right the way down just above the written word in terms of how abstract it is. Now, I'm not anti Makaton by any means, because if you work in a special school, you use it a lot, yeah? But equally, I don't quite understand why this means biscuit, all right? That is a sign for biscuit. A lot of our young people at my previous schools that I've always worked at would use Makaton more to do with kind of interaction, singing games, that kind of thing. In terms of getting their needs met, they found it quite tricky to be able to retain all a huge vocabulary of Makaton signs, and also would also find it quite tricky to direct that communication and check that that adult has received it. So, you know, when we looked at joint attention, where actually they hand the photo over, the object, symbol, whatever it may be, you have it up here, you wait for them to look between the photo object and yourself, and then you name it, then you give them the object they've asked for. Makaton doesn't allow you to do that. I've had a situation before, I had a young person sitting in the middle of my classroom signing more, but he wasn't directing at anybody. It was only because someone noticed it, but then actually he wasn't then initiating communication. He hadn't realised that he needed a communication partner. So like I say, I'm not anti-Makaton. I just think often you'll see it in EHCPs for a young person with SLD. Yes, use Makaton, okay, but let's use it alongside other things, because look how very, very abstract it is. And if we're thinking about a young person that has severe learning difficulties, we don't really want to be going, let's go for the most abstract first. There's also the element that in the outside world of tutoring within the home or teaching within a school, lots of people will be able to understand a photo or a symbol or an object. So my young little 3 and 4 year olds, we could go to the Wimpy and they could ask for something off the menu, because I'd cut it up and stuck it in their PECS book and we practiced and everything. If they went in and signed for chips or burger, I don't necessarily think that adult working in Wimpy would understand. So although I think it's got a place, but this is just my personal opinion by any means. But in terms of like teaching, I would use it alongside. I wouldn't use it as like a main expressive communication thing. Okay, does anybody want to say anything about that? Oh, no. Okay, right, well, I've already done a bit about Makaton. Oh no, I'll carry on, it's at the bottom. Okay, I see I've got all excited about talking about Makaton then. Right, so this is back to do with symbolic development, and also I just put these in because I wanted us to have a bit of discussion. So you might have to unmute yourself for this part, okay? If they talk, they might get a certificate, mightn't they, Rachel? I'm joking. I'm joking. Okay, so the first outcome I took directly from an EHCP plan that of a young person that I was working with. So effectively communicate his preferences to adults, and also that'd be about follow instructions using visual resources. Now, if we look at expressive communication, is that there in that outcome? Yeah. Yeah, anyone? It is there, yeah. What about receptive communication? Is that referred to in that outcome?
Instructions.
I can't believe how quiet you are. Shall I, do you want me to go for it?
Yeah, please.
Okay, okay. Right, it's not like a test, don't worry. It's just quite informal. Okay, so it says there, we'll follow instructions, and straight away you go, oh, brilliant. Receptive communication has been included in this outcome. Then it goes on to say using visual resources. Now, the minute you put a visual resource in, you're actually then talking about something that's actually cognition, okay? because a visual resource is all about reading the environment for information. If it just said we'll follow verbal instructions, then we could go, brilliant, receptive communication has been included. Do you see how that's different?
Yeah.
And I only put this in there because I used to get this time and time again. So I wanted to put it in here because if you guys, when you are reading EHCPs, I really want you to, obviously you can't then go away and write a new outcome. I totally get that. But you can like question it. And I think it's important that you do question it, because we should do as professionals, and just double check. Visual resources does not then equate to receptive communication. You know, when people say, oh, it's fine because he can follow instructions because he's got a visual timetable. No, he's reading the environment. If you took that away and you just relied on the verbal instruction, then there's nothing to say that the understanding would be there. So I've just put that in there, okay? Often you will also get in a section F, examples of strategies. You'll get every single one going for one young person, regardless of the level they're working at. So you would get PECS, Macaton, objects of reference, pro-like credit scale. You might get the whole lot in there, because it's like someone's gone, okay, they need support with communication, they need this, and pop it all in. So I think always go back to what level of understanding that young person has in terms of being able to read the information. You know, don't go for PECS that are symbolized text if you think that's not appropriate. They can learn the skills of PECS, but like we said before, on the examples that I've given, we can still use objects even though we're teaching PECS. All right. And then the last one, remember that Macaton is one of the most abstract. So we teach our young people to sign more and please, but in terms of them being able to use spontaneous communication, directing it, and also adding it into using it in the community, just take all those things into account if you are going to be using Macaton. If I sign more, you're then going to have to double guess. Okay, do you want more of this? Do you want more of this? Do you want more of this? Unless we're doing an activity, you've removed the item and then I'll sign more. But if I just randomly come up to you and say more, you're going to be like, okay, and what do you want more of? And then you're having to second guess. Whereas with the use of PECS, we can then be really clear about the language and the vocabulary that young person has, and therefore they can get their needs met pretty quickly, more in comparison. Okay. But Macaton I would always use to reinforce receptive communication, and I think that's probably where it's better for our young people with severe learning difficulty. Rather than expressive, I would use it for receptive a little bit more. So, but also I'm not a speech and language therapist, so you know, what do I know? Okay, I feel like that's my last page. I'm going to stop sharing.